Welcome to MIMM's Halloween special. Every day this week, a new collaboration will be posted featuring no sleep stories. Afterwards, I will be returning to my usual mix of true scary stories, original ones, and no sleep. But for now, I hope you enjoy this selection and the guest narrators. Joining me today is Somber Reads. Go check out his channel, link is in the description. On there, he does creepypastas and no sleep stories. Don't forget to subscribe to him. Now, without further delay, on to the stories, and have a happy Halloween.
When I look back on what I saw back there, in that small town, all I feel is numb. What else can you feel in the face of such horror? The case I'm about to present before you is disturbing. It's not a pleasant story by any means, and certainly not for those weak of hearts and stomach. But it's a story that needs to be told. It all began in the woods surrounding a small town about a month ago. It was in these woods that the first victim was found. A man by the name of Tom Grady. His body was found naked, his face skinned off. The police's main suspicions were on a crazy drug-fueled murder of some sort, or maybe a regular drug-fueled naked run through the woods that ended in a meeting with a bear. Extraordinary, but simple when you looked at it. That was, until they checked his stomach contents. The coroner, a solid man by any standard, had to get out of the room and vomit in the trash can. They found his face in his stomach. The main theory shifted again. The man was drugged on some crazy shit and did what he did on drugs. That one lasted as long as a month before the forensic report came back. The man was clean as a teddy bear. He had to just be crazy then. It couldn't be anything else. Then it happened again. 2 bodies together in the woods. A man and a woman. Naked. Their faces skinned. At least this time, the coroner didn't vomit when he pulled out their half-digested faces from their digestive tracts. Nor were there any theories for the negative test results to dash. Only blind confusion. It happened again. A kid, 15, naked in the woods. And again, even younger, only 13 years old. And it kept on happening. Every couple days, a new victim in the woods. A figure started forming when the local newspaper printed the first sighting of the Skin Man. An old photo, black and white with just one small caption, taken in the woods. It was poorly lit, showing a figure among the trees. At first glance, his head was blank. Then, as your eyes adjusted, you could see it clearer. From the neck down, his whole body's skin was face after face, stitched together to form a humanoid clothing. From this, a legend started to grow. The Skin Man was a demonic spirit that lived in the woods, that lured people into the woods and made them mutilate themselves. The whole thing was horrific, nasty, and none of my business. I wouldn't have bothered with these urban legends and skinnings at all. At least, until I got a phone call from an old college friend, John. The Skin Man had taken his 8-year-old son. I was on the extremely shady side of the PI business. None of my friends ever wanted me to work for them, even if I offered. So I knew he was calling me out of sheer desperation. I arrived at the town the day after. His household had held up incredibly well after the death. His wife sought comfort from a support group on social media. Tom Grady had been an active member of the group, so the whole community was mourning together. John had a friend on the police force, the coroner who performed the autopsy. He was how I got the vomit story. Great guy. Together, I and the coroner made a promise to John. I would do anything and everything in my power to find out what was, legal or not. The coroner would try as much as he could to point his colleagues in the direction I'd give them. We swore an oath in his son's bedroom. It took me 3 months to scrounge everything up that I needed at the end of it. I called John and his police friend over. I was surprised to see the coroner arrive first, while John was the one who was late, by a whole hour. Sorry I'm late. I was with my wife trying to find her phone. She lost it I waved it by. We'll talk later. I solved it. I mentioned then to follow me. I led them to my living room where I had set up my projector. I want you to know one thing, John. None of this is legally enforceable in court. The only thing you'll get out of watching this is you'll know exactly what is happening in this town. I saw no rejection in their eyes, only grim acceptance. I turned on the projector. On the screen showed a young girl in a bedroom lying on a bed. The lights were off, and the only illumination came from a window peering outside. John twitched. That's my neighbor's daughter. Yes, I stole the tape from her parents. He had a disgusted look and moved as if to block the projector, but I pointed to the screen. Look at the window. The light from her window came from another window. It came from a lamp shining upon a bedroom. John stepped back as recognition clicked in his head. It was his son's bedroom, the very night he disappeared. He was right there, lying in his bed. Through the girl's window, we could see everything. For a few moments, we sat together in silence, watching the child as the moment of reckoning drew nearer. Then we heard a loud screeching noise. It was hard to make out what it was due to the heavy distortion. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the bedroom door lock turned and opened, revealing a silhouette of a humanoid figure standing in the hallway. It marched forward to his son's bed, hands reaching for him. It crossed the lamplight, and I heard a gasp from beside me as the face of John's wife emerged from the darkness. As we watched, she grabbed her son's shoulders and shook him awake. She whispered something into his ear and took him in her arms. As she carried him down the stairs, the screeching noise started again, still distorted but now clear enough to be identified as the sound of a car revving up. I paused the tape. John was frozen, just staring blankly at the screen. Good. Frozen was just how I needed him. Otherwise, he might have punched me for what I did next. I took out a phone. John's wife's phone. I told you I was shady. As I punched in her password and accessed her group on social media, I pulled up her messages and connected to the projector and cast it on the screen. And then the real story started. The story of a cancer that had been growing in this closed town. The cancer that hid under the skin of a support group. The chat showed the slow degradation of the group into a cult. No, not a cult. A cult takes passion. What these people had was intense apathy to human life. Originally, The purpose of the parent support group had been just that, a place for parents to vent and be comforted. Over the course of several months, the support had been becoming more and more derailed. More posts started showing up about how ungrateful their kids were, how much of their lives the parents had to give up to raise them, how they were forming gangs. They couldn't have raised such bastards, could they? Slowly, a growing belief was starting to spread among the members that their children were cursed, born evil. It was here that the Skin Man was born. It was Sean Theron who dug up the old tale. The Skin Man was an ominous figure from an old wives' tale, a dark influencer who wanted discord and whispered dark things to children, corrupts them until their souls ran black and then led them to skin their parents alive. Maybe it was supposed to be a joke at first. Oh, the Skin Man. He was the real reason the town's kids were so rotten. Oh, the Skin Man. What other sensible reason was there? None. It was the only reasonable explanation. People started talking about how they sometimes thought their children would spend too much time talking to themselves in their room. How they thought they might have heard someone talking back. How the children seemed awfully fond of the woods. And then, one day, it stopped being a joke anymore. A tale from the city came of a boy who killed his own father. The group was aflame. How could they stand by and watch this dark figure destroy their world? How could no one else do anything when the evidence was so strong? When was it all so obvious? The Skin Man was doing it. They had to do something. They had to go outside of the system, because the Skin Man might have gotten to everyone else. Tom Grady, an ardent supporter of the original purpose of the group, was going to shut the whole thing down. He offered a desperate plea to the mob, asking them to come to their senses. That didn't go down well with them. After all, if you couldn't see that the Skin Man had to be stopped, you were either getting in the way, or worse, actively supporting him. Once again, it was Sean Theron who started it. He privately messaged everyone in the group, begging them to take action against this dark figure that was ruining their lives. Tom was practically a follower of the Skin Man by opposing the group. It was kill or be killed. So they grabbed him. He was their first victim, their experiment to finalize their method. But the stomach? Once you dismiss the impossible, only the possible, no matter how horrific it may be, remains. Tom was force-fed his own skin. The group was ecstatic. Celebration all around. True justice. Justice the system wouldn't understand. Victory against the Skin Man. John's wife sent more than a few flirty messages to the hero, Sean. From there, the horrific crusade continued. Parents were given the duty of purifying their children. And so they did. Their children really weren't their children. Demons, sent by the cursed figure. Demons that had eaten their real children, and would soon come to torture them. It was self-defense against a greater evil. Vengeance against the Skin Man. And that was that. John had dropped to the floor now, kneeling, his eyes still staring away at nothing. We helped him to his feet and accompanied him to his home, where we left him, sitting in silence in his living room. From that day on, the very structure of the investigation changed. Instead of searching for a single killer, the focus turned on the parents, and the results came rushing. Dozens of arrests in the first week. John's wife was one of the first. It should have been the biggest story of our time, but it isn't. The story hasn't spread at all. Sean Theron was the editor of the newspaper. There was absolutely nothing found against him, not even on the Grady case. I don't know how a guy like that was so fucking clean, but he's still free now, free to run his pen all over the morning news. All the people of this little town knows now is that the skeptics and the pighead police were now arresting ordinary people for their crimes of the dreaded skin men. His daughter hasn't disappeared, yet, despite my very presence there putting me at risk. I managed to get a message through to his wife. Recently, the newspapers have turned against her, openly calling her a whore and a liar. I hope to God she gets custody. A heavy fear hangs on me that I wouldn't be able to enter that town ever again. John's been at the police station protesting day and night of his wife's innocence. He's still talking about possession and shape-shifting. He still believes in the skin men. Recently, not 1 hour ago, I got a text from my police friend. It was about John's wife. She's now saying the skin men made her do it.
I wish we'd never gone to the circus when I was little. My younger brother Clyde and I adored it when we were kids. It was a small traveling circus, and my dad, the master of community events, knew it came to our part of the country every summer. It was always in the same location, right at the outskirts of town. My family lived in a more rural area, so this was our highlight of the season. Dad would buy 4 tickets for us in advance and get them when they were at their cheapest price. The circus itself didn't start until after dark, but he liked to drive us there early to get the most out of the night. Whenever we'd park, the sun was still setting. The staff was finishing their setup, but the second we walked to the gate, a smell of hot, buttered popcorn and fresh cotton candy tickled our noses. There wasn't much to do at first, but the food was ready without fail when we arrived. The funnel cakes were Dad's favorite, so he'd lead us around the circus grounds to buy one for Mom and himself, and another for Clyde and me to split. Clyde would skip along the barren ground right behind Dad. From the toothy, rosy-cheeked grin on his face, it was no secret he loved the funnel cakes as much as Dad did. Mom didn't have quite the same enthusiasm as the rest of us, though. She'd be walking behind us, distracted by the big striped tents. Mom was watching the staff feed the caged animals one last time before the show. She had a fascination with them, the elephants more so than the rest. A smile always came to her face when she'd ask, "Are we going to see Zeus and Hera soon?" "Not yet, dear," Dad replied, "but the show's about to start soon." The 4 of us would stand near the funnel cake stand, and Dad, Clyde, and I stuffed our faces every time like clockwork. So what if it was still a little too hot? That never mattered. Clyde and I loved the powdered sugar the most. But while we were brushing the little bits of it off of our shirt, I noticed Mom's fixation. While she'd been working on her funnel cake, Mom was looking elsewhere. She was watching the clowns, right outside their tent. It was the first time any of us had seen them before the show itself. There was a look of quiet unease across her face. Her hands were trembling and she stopped eating. She turned to Dad and asked, "Can we go sit somewhere else?" Pointing to the other side of the circus grounds. She said, "Let's go over there and eat. Can we?" He didn't say anything at first, but nodded and said, "Sure." The clowns were outside their tent, as if they were waiting for their cue. They were in full costume, large smiles painted and gnarled across their faces. A lot of them were older. All of them had hair, whiter than snow, extended out, layered in sweat and grease. But they weren't wigs, and it wasn't dyed. Their hair was colored white, all the way down to the roots. They weren't all the same age, though. While some ranged from their 20s all the way into their 50s, others were younger. A couple of them were shorter than 4 feet. Their bodies still had full lips and little bits of fat one would see on a child. Yet the bags under their eyes drooped down, as if they hadn't slept in weeks. Their eyes were unnaturally pale, riddled with protruding blood vessels, The skin on their faces were wrinkled, crackling, and dried like tree bark. But among all the clowns, they had the same look across their faces. Their common gaze was decayed stone, piercing into something far beyond the circus grounds. They were still, inanimate like objects. As more people gradually walked in the gates and the sun grew dimmer, there was a gentle thud of footsteps from within the clown's tent. It was the sound of footsteps edging closer to the outside. Inside the tent was an array of flickering candlelight, surrounding the tall, lumbering shadows of whomever stood near the edge. It was oddly tall, lanky along most of its body, with a thick, bulbous hunch at the top of its back. It had a crooked, pointed beard and an elongated nose. Atop its scraggly head of hair was an extended, thin top hat that bent down just like the figure's spine. The figure never uttered a syllable. It just reached out an arm that had to have been most of the body length, and we could see its hand stretch outside the tent. The skin was white as the clown's faces, and translucent as if suffering from an extreme anemia. It was sprinkled with pale boils with elongated, yellow curled fingernails. As it extended its fingers, the clowns turned. All at once they faced the four of us. Their expressions hadn't changed, nor did their eyes look away. But they didn't stand there for long. The figure in the tent turned its hand to make a beckoning gesture. The clowns turned to it at once and drifted inside. Dad took Mom by the hand and led us away. We were sitting at a different part of the grounds. Clyde and I were watching our parents. We could see Mom shivering on one of the chairs left for the audience members near the gate. The area was becoming more crowded. Dense groups of people buying popcorn, cotton candy, and funnel cakes, and playing carnival games around the tents. But we didn't participate in the games this year at all. All that mattered was Mom. Clyde and I didn't say anything, but we heard their murmured conversation. "You okay, dear?" Dad asked. "I don't know, it's just the clowns. One of them really got me." "What do you mean?" The look across his face only grew more skewed with worry as she answered. "One of the little ones. I can't tell if they're really kids, but, darling, you're gonna think I'm crazy." "No, not at all. What is it?" "One of the girls. Somehow she looked familiar." "Familiar?" "Yeah, like one of the kids I used to play with as a kid. It's probably a little deja vu." "I wish we could leave," Mom whispered. "Just the clowns and that man in the tent. I don't know how to explain it." "Try." A minute of silence and she replied, "No, it's probably nothing. It's just my imagination, that's all, and I don't want to ruin it for the boys. They love coming here." My biggest regret was always the fact that I didn't say anything. If only I spoke up. If only I told her that she wasn't imagining things. If only I told her that I saw it too. The tragedy wouldn't have happened. Even to this day, I couldn't help feeling the guilt as if it were my fault. Once the circus music sounded off, the smaller crowds joined together and went inside the big top. Mom stood up with a little assuring smile, telling Dad she'd be okay. We followed the crowds into the big top and took our seats. As always, the first part of the show was the lights. A dazzling aurora of sparkling colors burst from the center of the show to engulf and illuminate the entire tent. Out of the whole audience, my brother was taken the most by them. The smile on his face was bigger than ever. He was standing up, cheering with his arms up in the air. My parents looked over and grinned with Clyde before gesturing him to sit back down. Once the lights were settled and still, the clowns ran to their circular stage, performing somersaults, backflips, and all sorts of acrobatics. The smiles of sheer delight on their faces were contagious. Cheers spread across the entire big top as they waved to the audience. And when they brought out Zeus and Hera and all the other animals, the worry on Mom's face dissipated. The audience was amazed to see the clowns balancing on the tips of the elephants' trunks and escalating to more daring acrobatics. First, there'd only be one clown. Then they'd link hands with the second, lifting them into the air. The second would be upside down, extending their legs out and balancing with perfection. Then a third would stand on the second's feet, and so on until 6 clowns made a chain on each trunk. The audience was in an uproar of applause. Clyde was standing on his chair, bouncing on the balls of his feet. He cheered as loudly as he could, clapping his little hands above his head. When it was all over, the massive crowd was dispersed into the nighttime chill around the big top. They split up, flocking to the food stands and carnival games. On our way to the popcorn stand, I caught something in the corner of my eye. At first it looked like a white and blue blur, but when I turned, one of the clowns was standing a short distance from us. It was one of the taller, middle-aged ones. He wore a bright blue and white suit with sky-colored pom-poms and indigo gloves. He had the same dead stare in his colorless, wrinkled face as he did before the show. Tufts of pure white hair sprung out in all directions, and an oversized, gnarled smile was painted over his fixed grimace. The clown was clearly breathing, but the rest of his body was still as he gazed at us. Other people in the crowds didn't notice him. They were too occupied getting in line for games and food. I grabbed Clyde's hand and followed our parents. As we squeezed through clusters of people, he had trouble keeping up. It felt as if he were being weighed down. I tried pulling a little harder, but it didn't make him pick up his pace. By the time we reached the stand, I felt his hand let go of mine. He had to have been straight behind us at this point. There was no way he could have gotten lost. Yet, through the crowds, I barely heard a high-pitched wail echoing from the distance. I turned around. There was no sight of the clown. There was also no Clyde. I shouted his name and looked through the crowds, but he wasn't anywhere to be seen. I tugged on Dad's shirt as he ordered 3 large bags of popcorn. When I told him Clyde was gone, he searched the crowds, shouting his name. Mom took my hand and the two of us followed, calling Clyde's name with him. We had trouble keeping up with him, but were as frantic as he was. We searched through the crowd for hours until a midnight sky set in, chilling us to the bones. The rest of the audiences drifted from the circus grounds to their cars and back onto the streets. As the highway filled with pairs of glowing, off-white eyes, we stopped at a somewhat nearby motel and Dad called the police. A search went on for weeks, and I told them all about the clowns. We heard the circus itself was put under suspicion, but nothing ever came of it. The police said that despite their thorough investigation, they couldn't find any leads for Clyde's whereabouts. The years passed, and a lot of us accepted the probable reality of Clyde's abduction. We didn't expect to see him again. We quietly mourned the loss, but didn't stop Mom or anybody else from clinging on to hope. Clyde was always a smart boy, Mom would say. There are stories of little kids who escaped from being kidnapped. I'm willing to bet Clyde was one of them. We never denied the chance. It gave us a spoonful of hope that eased us like medicine. We'd smile and tell her that it was possible. For all we knew, he could have started a life of his own. We even hoped that at some point, Clyde would find his way back. But the years went by and no Clyde. Yet Mom never let go of her hope. She even started taking the car, just to take a long drive. She'd pay for the gas and everything, but once Mom said she wandered out of the state and back, the intention was obvious. I think it was relieving to get away sometimes, but at the core of it, she was quietly searching for my little brother. But my adulthood crept in, and still nothing. It was odd to look back at the black and white pictures of Clyde and think this little kid with pudgy cheeks, freckles, blue eyes, and jet black hair would have been an uncle. The years became decades, and old age set in. The children grew up and made me a grandparent. I hate to admit it, but there were even moments where I forgot what Clyde used to look like. Thank God I saved my family's old scrapbook in my attic. It served as a wonderful reminder. Sooner or later, the grandkids were almost big enough to start going to school. The memories of what happened to Clyde began to fade. I remembered that he went missing when we were kids, but the why and how? The details got fuzzy whenever I tried to recall any of them. The grandkids started staying over for an entire month every summer. It was a great way to spend time with them outside of the holidays, and the weather was always fantastic. So visiting the nearby park and the playgrounds became an instant favorite of theirs. I even showed them the nearby creek and taught them how to fish. We were all so proud of them when they caught their first fish. The pictures of them holding up their catches went right into a brand new scrapbook. But this one would be all the memories of them growing into adulthood. The summer before the grandkids were supposed to start school, we wanted to make it special. We wanted to do something a little different. The idea of a theme park was brought up, but they were still too little to go on most of the rides. Roller coasters would have been better when they were closer to being in 4th grade, because they'd be tall enough to go on all the rides. but I had an idea. Warm memories of the circus I went to as a kid resurfaced. I was pretty new to using the internet, but something called Google turned out to be pretty handy. It only took a minute to find that not only were there traveling circuses still going on, but the name of the one that I saw as a kid came up in one of the first search results. I remembered feeling a bit uneasy about the clowns, but couldn't pinpoint why. As a kid, I was pretty easy to scare. Until the age of 7, I believed a monster haunted my closet at night, so it wasn't a stretch that the clowns would spook me too. I bought tickets for the whole family, and to start off the month where the grandkids stayed, we went to the circus. The parking lot that night was crowded, blanketed over in a chilling darkness. The cloud-embraced moon was glaring down at the family like an enormous white eye. When we walked up to the ticket booth, the grandkids skipped ahead of us. They weren't out of our sight, but trying to catch up was a cold reminder of old age. As we waited in line to get in, I looked around and peered over the dense crowd of people. Once I handed in our crisp new tickets and got the stubs back, I handed them out to the family. I gave a little reminder to everyone to keep the stubs on them until we leave, just in case. When we got in, I looked around and noticed something. One of the clowns was nearby. I couldn't help being mesmerized by his height and facial features. His eyes were encircled by deep bags, like he hadn't slept in forever. The blue irises were horribly pale. His skin was crinkled and dry like the bark on a tree. Yet his cheeks were pudgy and the lips were full like a child's. His little nose was covered in freckles, and his mouth was painted over with a wide, blue gnarled smile that twisted across his face. It matched his striped blue and white baggy outfit. His hair was absolute white, pure as the moon, and extended out in all directions. My lower lip quivered in black fear when all the memories flooded back like a tidal wave. I felt my eyes sting with hot tears as I recognized the little clown. Everyone else didn't seem to think he was part of the circus. They all went around him and remarked that he must have been a really big fan of the show. Some wondered where his parents must have been, but didn't worry much. The words stuck in my throat, but I finally managed to utter something out. "Clyde?" At first, there was no response, but the clown shifted his head to face me. His eyes pierced into me with that 1,000-yard stare. The dead, hollow look across his face hadn't changed a bit. The old, familiar music boomed all throughout the circus, and his face changed. He suddenly turned on like a light switch. A giggling lightning bolt of excitement surged through his entire body. The amused crowds cleared a path for him as he ran towards the center stage. He was laughing and performing an array of somersaults and backflips all the way there.